Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This one involves the senses, specifically problems with vision. Now, I don't have time or space here to cover every single problem that a person can have with their vision, so what I'm going to be covering are some of the more common problems, one that you or friends or relatives of yours might have, or problems that you may have heard of and may have wondered exactly, well, where does that come from? For instance, one of the more common problems with vision is color blindness. Although in actuality, what we call color blindness is not really color blindness, it's actually color weakness. There is a difference between these. Now, technically, color weakness is the one that is incredibly common, while color blindness is very, very uncommon. And if you look at the names, you could perhaps get an idea why. When you say someone is colorblind, it would seem to indicate that they cannot see any colors at all, and that is indeed true. Technically, color blindness is when a person cannot see colors at all, no colors whatsoever. Usually this is because they either don't have any cones or there's some sort of serious global cone defect that prevents them from being able to see colors. Technically, it's called achromatopsia, and it's actually quite rare. And it's also really rather hard to deal with because think about it. Remember, we use cones to be able to see not only colors, but also in bright light and also with precise vision. So a person lacking cones would not only not be able to see colors, but they would not be able, perhaps, to read small print. They might not be able to go out during the daytime because it would be too bright for them. So yeah, color blindness is very rare. Now, what we call color blindness is more technically called color weakness. Although I know people that don't like that name. I've had people come up to say, I'm not weak. To which I want to say, well, you prefer being called blind. Apparently, color weakness is when an individual cannot see certain colors. They can see some colors, they cannot see all colors. And for the most part, the most common type of color weakness is called red-green color weakness. And what happens in red-green color weakness is when a person's cones react in the same way to red as they do to green. So red and green both pretty much look the same. There's also blue-yellow color weakness, which is much rarer, where blue and yellow tend to look the same. And if you have been reviewing how it is that we see colors, either through my lecture or another one, you might notice that I'm talking about those opposing pairs. And yes, it apparently not only has to do with the cones, but also how they are wired together in the brain. Now, red-green color weakness is so common because it's what's known as a sex-linked gene. Now, by sex here, I don't mean sex the verb, I mean sex the noun. There is one pair of chromosomes that determine whether an individual is male or female, in mammals anyway. In mammals, females have two what are called X chromosomes, and males have one X and one Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is very small, but it is mighty, because it is the Y chromosome that makes males. So women who have two X chromosomes basically have a backup. If one X chromosome is bad or has a bad gene on it, they can use the other one. Males don't have a backup. And guess what gene is found on the X chromosome? Yep, the gene for red-green color weakness. So if a man inherits that from his mother, and he inherits a Y chromosome from his father, which he pretty much has to be male, then he's going to have color weakness. So roughly 8% of males are color weak, and fewer than 1% of females are. Because for a female to have color weakness, she would need to inherit that gene from both her mom and her dad. And that happens much more rarely than simply inheriting one from mom. By the way, when we say animals are colorblind, we mean that animals are color weak. If an animal has any type of cone in their retina, they can see some colors. And a lot of animals may have one type of cone or two types of cones. Some even have all three. One way to tell whether or not an animal has all three types of cones is to look and see how colorful the animal itself is. Primates have all three types of cones. We tend to be very colorful creatures. A lot of birds do, a lot of fish do. But animals like dogs and cats and horses and stuff, they don't tend to be nearly as colorful, and they also don't have all three types of cones. Now, in terms of actually being able to see things clearly or not, the winner in terms of popularity, if that's the right word, is myopia. Now, myopia is the technical term for nearsightedness. It means that a person can see things close up properly, but not things that are far away. Things that are far away are blurry. And this usually occurs because it can occur from any of a number of things. The classic way to explain why it occurs is due to the size of the eyeball. Essentially, the eyeball is too long. There's only so much that the lens can accommodate, that the lens can bend light waves, because the idea of the lens is to be able to focus the light precisely on the retina. But if your retina is too far away from your lens, it cannot do it. The light that comes in from close up comes in at a different angle and can be focused, but the light that comes in from far away cannot. Myopia is extremely common, not only because it appears to have a genetic component in a lot of cases, but also because of the way we tend to live our lives in this world. Your body, remember, is a use it or lose it kind of thing. And if you spend all your time looking at things that are close to you and no time looking at things that are far away, eventually the lens is going to lose flexibility. The muscles working the lens are no longer going to be able to move in enough, and you can wind up nearsighted that way too. The opposite of myopia is hyperopia. Now, hyperopia is farsightedness. And it's the farsightedness that people get when they're young. It's not the age-related farsightedness. I'll get to that in a minute. So hyperopia often is because the eyeball is too short, so that images from far away can be focused, but images from close up cannot. It is much rarer. I suspect if it's genetic, it probably is. It's probably some sort of recessives, and so therefore you have to inherit both of them to have it, just like a woman with color weakness, and therefore it's going to be a lot rarer. Now, the age-related farsightedness that people get, that as they get older they have to be holding books farther and further away or wear bifocals or reading glasses, that's called presbyopia. Now, presbyopia is a product of aging. And it's not that all of a sudden as you age your eyeball shrinks. It doesn't work that way. But what does happen as we age is that our lens loses flexibility, much like the rest of us. The lens begins to lose its flexibility, and the muscles attached to it can no longer contort it into the position it needs to be in order to see things close up clearly. And so people wind up with farsightedness. And that's why very often a person may have perfect vision, but they hit 35, 40, 45, they may find that they need to wear glasses for reading and for close-up work. That is presbyopia. Now, in a perfect world, you'd think it would be impossible to have myopia and presbyopia at the same time. As you probably know, we don't live in a perfect world. They do actually cancel each other out a bit. An optometrist once told me that one of the first signs that presbyopia is coming in people with myopia is their eyes actually get a little better. But eventually, it is possible to be both myopic and presbyopic, and trust me, it's not a whole lot of fun. I'm not quite there yet myself, but I've seen my parents work with the bifocals and the trifocals and taking the glasses off and putting them back on, and it's a bit of a mess. It's one of the lovely side effects of aging. Now, I always wondered what astigmatism was, because I could never get a straight answer from an optometrist. They always say, well, we're testing you for astigmatism, and then I say, well, what's astigmatism? And they couldn't tell me. And I suspect the reason they couldn't tell me is because there's a baker's dozen of things that can cause astigmatism. Essentially, with astigmatism, what's going on is some of the visual field is out of focus, while some of it is just fine. Which sounds weird. With myopia and hyperopia and presbyopia, the whole shebang is out of focus. But with astigmatism, part of it, only part of it, is out of focus. Now, normally, remember, when we look at things, there's a central area that's in very good focus and the rest of it is blurry. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about bits and pieces in that central area that are not in focus, while the rest of it is. And astigmatism can be caused by any of a number of causes. Probably the most common is an oddly shaped cornea. For the most part, corneas are nice and rounded, but there are people who have corneas that are shaped a bit more like an American football. They have a point on them. I mean, not too pointy, but they aren't nice and rounded. And in fact, some people who do have corneas that are just a bit too pointy actually cannot wear contact lenses because the contact lenses keep popping off. And the idea then is to find out where the astigmatism is and to then, give the person glasses or in some cases special contact lenses, but mostly glasses, where the lenses are ground differently in different spots so everything all lines up and everything comes in clearer. For contact lenses, interestingly enough, normally contact lenses can circle and flow in your eye with no problem whatsoever. But there are contact lenses, I believe they're called toric lenses, and they're weighted so that when you put them in the eye, the weighted part goes to the bottom of the cornea. Gravity pulls it down, and that causes everything to line up. So people with mild astigmatism can wear contact lenses. Now, glaucoma, we're not talking about necessarily a problem with vision, although it can be with time. Glaucoma is when the pressure inside the eye builds to dangerous levels. Now you have fluids inside your eyes. You have, for the most part, it's called the vitreous humor, which is a thick jelly-like fluid that essentially plumps out your eye. By the way, if you ever look up at a blue sky or at a white wall and you see little things sort of wiggling across your vision, those go by the very scientific name of floaters. And they are probably, almost certainly, things that are stuck in your vitreous humor. They could be hardened bits of vitreous humor itself or part of the apparatus. And for the most part, floaters are harmless, although they can be a bit annoying, unless all of a sudden you have huge floaters when you didn't before, or the floaters are accompanied by flashes of light that are not coming from outside of you, because that could mean that something has damaged your retina and you need to go see the eye doctor, because you could have a detached retina, it could cause you to go blind. But glaucoma is when the vitreous humor, which is normally constantly produced and constantly drains out as it's being produced, so you get a nice flow, almost like a swimming pool. What happens is the drains stop working, or they get clogged, or they're too small, or the body starts making vitreous humor at a dramatic rate. And so you pump more in, but not enough is coming out to balance it. It's almost like filling up a water balloon. And as you can imagine, that would be painful, because your eye, for the most part, is surrounded by a bony socket. There's no place for it to go. And what can happen with time is the pressure gets so great in that vitreous humor that it can wind up essentially squishing the retina against the bone in the back of your eye socket, and you go blind. Luckily, there are lots of ways to treat glaucoma these days, ranging from prescription drugs and eye drops to marijuana apparently also works. Sometimes they will go in and literally drain the excess vitreous humor, put drains in, which I hope I never have to have done to me. Lastly, we have cataracts. Now, a cataract occurs when something goes wrong with the lens of the eye. It could be with the cornea, though usually that is something that is not as big of a deal. The corneas can actually be transplanted fairly easily because they don't have any blood supply. They get all their oxygen from the air. But in cataracts, something happens with the lens. It's been damaged, or with aging or exposure to ultraviolet light, the sunlight, it gets cloudy. And what happens essentially is the same thing that happens if you've ever driven in a car with a dirty windshield, particularly if you do it at night, is the light can't get in. You cannot see, or it's like a foggy window, trying to look out a foggy window, or foggy glasses. You go from outside where it's hot to inside where it's cold, or vice versa, and your glasses fog up, sunglasses, regular glasses. It's kind of like that. And the way to treat cataracts is usually, these days, by removing the lens and putting in an artificial lens that is perfectly clear. This is done fairly commonly these days. And actually what's kind of neat is if a person has myopia or hyperopia or presbyopia or probably even astigmatism, it's possible to implant a lens that will cure that. So it's like having a permanent contact lens put inside your eye with the muscles attached, so your muscles can move it just like it would your regular lens. So luckily we do have ways of treating cataracts in order to get rid of the cloudiness and allow people to see more clearly.